Does this hurt? The question broke a silence that had lasted for a while now, though Yoru could not tell how long specifically. In this game of cat and mouse, Viper had established her dominant stance almost as soon as the two had laid eyes on each other. And now, after she had successfully lured him into her trap, snaked her way around his body and shut out all escape routes, all he could do was wait. Moreover, the thrill and her breath against his skin kept Yoru obediently there. As a rift walker, he had access to dimensions. He could move through space and time. He was invincible in comparison to others, but the cool finger under his chin forced him out of his heroic thoughts and reminded him of the reality. Viper raised her eyebrows at him, and Roru shook his head. Good, she murmured, and gave a small tug at the leash held. She pulled away and took one final look at her creation. The composition was quite simple. Leather straps that would keep the rebel in his place. His hands tied and his legs trapped. The gag was not even an aesthetic choice. This man had to learn how to shut up. Additionally, it was exciting to see him without any bit of control, almost completely stripped of his belongings, save for a dark blue boxers that had his pale skin contrast in comparison. He was just like anyone else. With a sly smirk, Viper took several more steps to distance herself from the man, and slowly she began undoing her suit. The skin she revealed, the more his impatience grew. By the time she stopped swaying her hips to a melody only she could hear and stepped out of the bodysuit, wearing nothing more than a lace lingerie, grappling his legs like a saddle, and her hand roamed his body with curiosity, her twitching fingers seemingly trying to learn of every curve available. Suddenly, he could feel her lips and tongue caress his neck, first making a small trail of her, and then tiny experimental biting and tugging at the sensitive flesh. The Radiant let out a grunt, but his breathing hitched when yet another marking was left on his body, and she began grinding her hips against his. The scientist bit her lower lip when she could feel him rub right where she needed to. But a plan was a plan. Even if it meant denying herself what she wanted, a sound of muffled protest reached Viper's ears when she suddenly pulled away to look at him. Just as his pupils, hers were dilated in a feral need to ride it all out. Seeing how this was enough of a game for one day, she leaned down to tug down the fabric and reveal the fellow agent to herself in all his glory, wrapping her fingers around his hardened member. She took a moment to enjoy the view of a completely submitted warrior. He was pulsating beneath her fingers, eager, hot, and almost begging for her to show mercy when his hips buckled up a little. I can be generous, she promised, her whisper mirroring the same level of arousal Yoru felt. Her hand began moving, first slowly, and then adding more pace and friction. She leaned closer and rested her head over his shoulder and listened to him breathe and stare back at her. He was good, but they could do better. Offering a man a rare sight of a smile, Viper shifted once more, and he saw her glide her knees between his thighs. One more look at his face. She traced her tongue across his length before wrapping her lips completely around Yoru's arousal. His breathing was heavier than before, and though he wanted to keep looking down, the pleasure forced his eyes shut, and his head fell back. She was toying with him relentlessly, her hands massaging and playing with everything she found that would make him crave for the spirits he bowed down to, often bearing herself completely on him. It was not until she could feel the veins begin throbbing harder against her tongue and the taste of pre-cum made her pull away. She rose, her rosy lips slightly plump from using her mouth, and her cheeks both teary and pink. Wasting not a single moment, Viper removed her underwear and climbed on top of him. Only there she removed his gag and suppressed any sound he made before guiding his member into her wet and welcoming core. It took them a few seconds to adjust, to break the kiss, and to look at each other in silence before Sabine began rocking her body against his slow pace. He saw her nip at her lower lip once before when the pleasure began taking over her mind and body, and he could feel how her fingers sought out the support on his shoulder, while the other hand found solace in his hair. She began increasing the pace, her moans growing louder and louder. In a few seconds, the room was filled with the sound of two agents eagerly moving their bodies, the scent of their arousal drowning their senses and drawing them forward. Viper's back arched, and he could feel how her walls began tightening around his member, and suddenly her hips buckled against him. A loud moan escaped the scientist when she climaxed first, her body shaking from pleasure, and she rode out her orgasm, her hold on him frantic and her eyes shut and rolled back. The Rift Walker was fast to follow, his body hardly able to contain any of the teasing, ecstatic sensations or the heat much longer. Viper collapsed against his chest, smiling. The two of them tried to catch their breath, and for once, the snarky Riftwalker had nothing to say. He too was exhausted, but the relief received was worth the wait. Finally, she got up from his lap and released him from the belts. Her knees were weak to provide her with the usual fast pace, but the limp Yoru noticed was like a golden medal after a marathon, and it filled him with pride. What are you waiting for? Get up and leave. I do not have time to play friendly host. They did not share anything besides that. And when she heard Yoru tear through reality, she knew that the agent had left with the same smirk she was wearing. This would become a tradition. The two of them would not miss an opportunity to take the lead and show who is stronger, more creative, and better.